What's going on, everybody? Jackson Fuller here, and you are listening to another episode of Hoggin the Mic. I'll be joined by Andrew Hutchinson momentarily, and we're recording this episode Monday morning. Taylor Swift is a Super Bowl champion, and Arkansas basketball is coming off a victory. So, what a time to be alive in 2024. We'll dive semi deep into the Hogs' home win over Georgia before getting super amped for opening day. Snow is on the ground, optimism is in the air, and baseball season is here. But of course, this time of the year means we must obligatorily discuss an Arkansas baseball preseason injury. Tough break for Peyton Stovall. Hutch and I will talk about all of that and even a little bit of football talk. Let's play the music, bring in Hutch, and start up the latest episode of Hoggin the Mic. Hutch, how's it going, man? The big question everyone's asking, wants your opinion on, did Kyle Shanahan abandon the run too early last night and pick it up too late in overtime for the San Francisco 49ers?
It definitely seemed that way, didn't it? I think I saw a stat where they had like three straight 3-and-outs, and there was only one run in there. And you've got Christian McCaffrey. That seemed a little interesting.
Tough loss for the Niners last night, especially for Arkansas alum Dre Greenlaw. Hated seeing that. And honestly, kind of changed the game. I think, that's one less person to cover Kelsey and, defend Patrick Mahomes. But Mahomes is inevitable. So let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Arkansas sports. Razorback 78, Georgia 75 on Saturday inside Bud Walton Arena. Arkansas barely held on at the end to knock off the Bulldogs. Third SEC win of the season. Hutch, were you as surprised as I am when we got that 13th different starting lineup of the season? It is 13, right? It's L. Ellis at point guard, 4 guards, and no Jalen Graham. What'd you make of the lineup? And it worked, I guess, right?
I mean, yeah, it was the 13th different lineup, and it was interesting. But I mean, you got to also remember, I think that included Jeremiah Davenport. He didn't really play a whole lot, so I mean, as is always the case with Eric Musselman, the starting five really isn't who matters; it's who the closing five are, and that's where it kind of got interesting for Arkansas with basically 4 point guard type players out there at once. Probably not going to see that again this year, just because, as Eric Musselman said, there's not too many teams out there like Georgia. But yeah, that was an interesting game. I was talking to someone else before tip off, and we were saying, what do we think is going to happen? And he made a comment that nothing would surprise him, even if Arkansas won by 15. I said, now, I would be surprised if Arkansas won by 15. I said, now, if they get up by 15, blow it, and lose and win by 3, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And that almost happened. Got up by 12, blew it, and won by 3. So this team is just continues to be a little bit baffling.
Yeah, it was a weird game, really, because I went to after the game, I make the walk to the podium, and I'm thinking about what happened and getting ready to talk to Muss, and I'm like, man, the offense really kind of struggled there in the second half when they went to 1-3-1 zone, and then Muss says, hey, our offense was good other than stepping out of bounds and those costly turnovers. And I was like, what? But you look at the stats, I mean, they shot over 70% from the field in the second half. It didn't really make sense, the game flow, how they could shoot so well to let Georgia come back. I guess I agree with Muss. I still did not think the offense looked crisp at all in the second half. What did you make of how they attacked the 1-3-1 zone? I mean, did the turnovers just kind of cloud and shade maybe how we kind of viewed the offense there?
I guess so, because I was with you. I was like, man, I thought that 1-3-1 little extended zone, they were trapping out there up top. I mean, it seemed like it really bothered Arkansas, which, if you think in the past, that kind of has happened this year a few times. And so I didn't think it was that great. But I mean, I guess if you think about it, they would either make a shot or get fouled, go to the free throw line, or turn it over. And it was always late in the shot clocks. I mean, that's why it kind of cut down the possessions. I wouldn't say it was necessarily typical Eric Musselman stall ball, because I think it was just kind of necessitated by the defense they were facing. But I guess even though it didn't look the prettiest, it was pretty effective, I guess.
Yeah, it was very weird because it's hard to argue with the stats, right? I mean, they shot 73.7% from the field in the second half, and they shot 37.5% from three. They went 3 of 8, which is not a great number, but that's a much better clip than Arkansas had been shooting this year. I mean, there's been some SEC games where they're not even eclipsing 20% from three, and they got it up near 40 in the second half. The turnovers were a problem, but I think it was more fluky stuff. I mean, Keon Mennefield stepped out of bounds about 4 times. And look, I guess overall they'll take it. I think you mentioned the four guards that closed the game. That was L. Ellis, Keon Mennefield, Tremont Mark, Devo Davis, who we'll get to in a second. And then there was a constant rotation. I felt like mainly between in the second half, I guess, Chandler Lawson and no, excuse me, Jalen Graham and Makai Mitchell. Makai played most of the minutes, and I don't know. You say that they can't really play that way against other SEC teams. I'd like to see them try, honestly. Like they might get beat up on the boards, but clearly the offense is effective when they got this four guard approach in. We saw it against Abilene Christian. We saw it briefly in the UNCW win. I kind of like the way it looks offensively, and you can stretch teams out. And if Makai Mitchell's scoring like he can, you've got a presence inside too that's capable. I mean, do you think there's any way Muss tries this out against Tennessee on Wednesday?
Well, I mean, they definitely moved the ball better. I think Eric Musselman said there was like 220 something passes. Their goal is 200, so that the ball moved better. They were, efficient in scoring the ball. So I mean, maybe they give it a shot, but I mean, I just still believe it goes back to what we've talked about way back even when, first few episodes, where it depends on if Merritt Musselman just kind of does a philosophical shift where he's like, I don't care as much about defense. I'm going to try to put the best offensive lineup out there versus his typical strategy of trying to defend at a high level. He talked about, L. Ellis was able to defend the four. I think that's the main one he said, like for like 20, 25 minutes, something like that. Probably not going to be able to do that against most four-man. Georgia was a little bit small in that regard. So I don't know if he'll try that. Maybe he does it and has sticks Devo on the four or something like that. Because I think Devo's defended the four at times throughout the season. So maybe they try it. But all I know is Eric Musselman's going to try something. Probably something we haven't really seen much of because he keeps tinkering with things.
Yeah, game to game, there's just no sense of who is going to play, who's going to step up, and Musselman's admitted as much. I don't think he's happy about admitting that, but he said a couple times in press conferences, like we've asked him, like, hey, like, how does this coat roll over to next game? I think I asked him about that coming off the four guard lineup against Abilene Christian. He was like, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens next game. I don't know who's going to play well next game. We'll figure that out as we get there. And that's not a good place to be for a program, and a big reason why I think Arkansas is 12-11 this season. We got to talk Devo. What'd you make of his performance? 4 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists. You take the floor first, then I'll give my opinion. What did you think of Devo on Saturday?
I thought he was actually pretty good. I know that's maybe a hot take for some people, and I wrote this after the game that he really did well. I know everyone's going to point to the last minute of the game that was a little bit where everyone says it was just awful, where he almost lost the game, but he also made some key plays that helped them win the game as well in the final minute. I think it was you after the game that said it was the stereotypical, Devo Davis type of deal where, he had the turnover. He missed, one of the 2 free throws that could have really iced it. He fouled the 3-point shooter, which I don't know what he was thinking on that play. But he also had just the incredible pass to Makai early. Like it was like with like 50 something seconds left that put Arkansas up. That was just a tremendous pass. He also, after the turnover, I went back and watched the replay. After the turnover, he hustled back and he was the guy who defended and got a hand in the face of the guy shooting the 3 and helped him, probably affected that shot. It didn't fall. Otherwise, it would have been wide open. Maybe it does fall. So, he does, make some frustrating plays, but also you also got to remember that one turnover he had, the only turnover he had in 35 minutes after being away for 2 weeks. that's pretty impressive. And the fact that he played 35 minutes too, that you got to give him credit for that. And he was +8. That's a stat that I know is not necessarily the best stat in the world, but Eric Musselman puts a lot of stock in it. +8, tied with I think Keon Minifield for the best marker on the team. So you got to give him some credit. I think he played maybe better than I expected. Honestly, I didn't expect him to play 35 minutes. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think my take is out of the 34 minutes and 34 seconds that he played, he was terrific for about 34 minutes. I mean, really, really terrific. He only took one shot, but he had an impact on the offense and just he made the unselfish cuts. He passed the ball. He kept it moving within the offense. He was the one that kind of was operating out of that high post at times against the zone. It felt like when they were in that zone, when Georgia was in that zone, Devo was kind of the best option at finding the way to crack it. Like he could maybe not get the assist, but he would get the pass that set up the shot or set up the foul. Um, you know, I would like to see him be even more aggressive offensively. I think only taking one shot is not sustainable really for a guy that plays 37 minutes or 35 minutes, excuse me, and has his kind of offensive capabilities. It's been a struggle for him this season shooting. And so maybe he's trying to work his way back and, do some of the other little things first, but he did all of those little things. His defense was terrific. Guarding the four when he needed to, guarding, the BJ Hill Hill and the other Georgia guards. I think he spent time on almost every Georgia player other than their center. Terrific. And that pass to Mekhi Mitchell, I'm not sure there's another person on the Arkansas roster that can make that pass, threading it between three defenders and finding Mitchell. He really tried to goof it up there at the end, but for the first 34 minutes he was terrific, and it was good to see him back out there. And really I think we pretty much knew this would happen, especially once Musselman kind of gave the endorsement for it, but it was really good to see the cheers and the positivity in welcoming him back to the team on Saturday from the crowd.
Yeah, that was really good. I was very glad that it was a nice ovation for him because he deserves it. I mean, we can't forget all the good things he's done, just because of it hasn't gone well this year. He left the team, which again I want to specify. He stepped away from the team. That's the phrase everyone used. He did not quit. I know that's the buzzword among the fan base is that he quit on the team. He's a quitter. Well, I mean, Eric Musselman didn't sound like a guy, the way he was talking did not sound like he had quit. I mean, he said that he always expected him to come back. Talking to the players, L. Ellis and Tremont Mark, neither one of them said that he quit, and they spoke very highly of him, talking about, he's a high basketball IQ, and, it really helps him when he's out there on the court. Did not sound like teammates or a coach that didn't like him. And if the teammates like him and the coach likes him, why wouldn't you like him as a fan? That's come on. I mean, you got to give him. And who knows the circumstances behind his departure? Who knows what's going on? Whether it be family, mental health, whatever it is. It was obviously he had the blessing of Eric Musselman, and to me that should be enough.
I will say there was definitely some frustration after the Kentucky game from Musselman, right? I mean, when we got him in that press conference, it did not feel like a blessing. And look, it was fresh. He didn't want to talk about it. Like, he was frustrated. They had just lost a home game where they were right there, had a big chance to pull off a pretty substantial upset. However, we've seen what's happened to Kentucky since then. But yeah, there was definitely some frustration on Muss's side in the immediate aftermath. But as we got closer and closer to his return, you could kind of sense that this was not a guy quitting on the team or something super malicious from Devo. It was more of, hey, whatever's going on is none of our business. And he came back and he was terrific. He only scored 4 points. He was one of their best players on Saturday and played a big part in them winning their third SEC game of the year. And they've played 10. So these don't come around too often this year. I think Arkansas fans need to savor it and get ready for a challenge on Wednesday with Tennessee. But good to see Devo back out there for sure. And kind of excited to see what comes next for this team now I mean, they've won 2 of their past 3 games. Devo is back. They've got a big home game. I'm not saying things are going to magically turn around, but I'm excited to kind of just see what the effort and what the closed second half of the season just looks like in terms of how these guys are playing for each other and playing for Musselman, because there are a few guys on this team that you'd hope are back next year. And, I think we discussed the Musselman rumors last week. I think the fan base hopes he's back as well. So let's see what that combination players and coach are made of here down the stretch, with not a whole lot to play for, but some pride on the line for sure. Let's see. I think that can kind of wrap us up for basketball talk. Hutch, you ready to talk baseball and get hyped for opening day this Friday?
Always. I love baseball season, my favorite time of the year. So let's do it.
Okay, awesome. Well, sadly, Peyton Stovall won't be a part of the opening weekend narrative, at least from how he plays standpoint. Arkansas's stud second baseman broke his foot in a scrimmage on last Monday. We were there at the scrimmage. He took I think a fastball off the foot in his first at bat, stayed in the game. I think he went 2 for 2 after getting hit by the pitch. Did not run the bases. He got another hit by pitch later in the game, but really tough break. He'll be out 4 to 6 weeks. Doesn't need surgery. How big of a blow is this, Hutch? Does this kind of change a little bit of early season optimism for this team? I mean, he was going to be a leadoff guy and one of their better hitters. This is a big blow, right?
Yeah, especially because he was actually starting to hit the ball really well. I mean, as you said, he stayed in the game, got another couple of hits. I mean, just right after having the first hit by pitch, he hit a rocket to, I think it's right center for a double. That was like 100 miles an hour off the bat. Then when he came up the next time, he poked a single the other way. I mean, it looked like he was really kind of finding his groove offensively after kind of a slow start on the first weekend of preseason practice, which was his first time back in like full scrimmage stuff after missing the fall. So it's bad timing. But is it the end of the world? Should it hurt Arkansas's optimism? I would say no, because they do have options. They do have other guys that can fill in, and it's not a season-ending injury. I know you mentioned at the top, Arkansas preseason injuries. This always happens. Well, the previous two were much more significant because it was, one, your projected ace, a much harder role to fill, and they were out for the entire year. I'm talking about Peyton Paulette 2 years ago, Jackson Wiggins last year. That's two significant injuries right there. This one isn't quite that level because only 4 to 6 weeks, should return, and then obviously you've got other guys ready to fill in behind, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a little bit of concern just in the sense that, if it is 6 weeks, I mean, you're missing half the season. There's going to be, I'm not, you have to anticipate some added recovery time when he comes back. He's not going to be firing on all cylinders right away. He's got to, get back into the game rhythm and everything. My main concern is that, look, Arkansas has the highest of aspirations this season. Can the Hogs win a national championship without Peyton Stovall? I mean, maybe, but it would be a lot easier if they had him in that lineup, playing second base every day, being that power leadoff guy at the top of the lineup, and another lefty in what looks like a righty heavy lineup this year. So, yeah, not too much concern, but my eyebrows are starting to raise a little bit and say, like, they can't really afford another injury to the infield, and I need to see him come back and kind of start being super, super productive. I don't think a broken foot's better than a season-long injury or a season-ending injury, but it's still a broken foot. I know I'd be ruined if I broke my foot. So, then Peyton Stovall's a much better athlete than me, thankfully. So, when we think about the lineup moving forward now, I think Peyton Holt's going to play second base, it looked like. At least he did in the Friday scrimmage that we went to. He was taking a lot of ground balls and BP beforehand there. It looks like the plan is to have him at second and Jared Spraglott at third. Are we happy with this? Does DVH need to check with us? And do we have different opinions about where the replacements should be, Hutch?
I felt like Jared Spraglott was going to be the guy who came into the lineup with the injury. My biggest question was where he would play defensively, because Peyton Holt is probably more of a natural second baseman, but he'd been playing third base because of Stovall. And Spraglott is kind of their utility infielder, but Van Horn has also said that he's probably more of a natural third baseman. And so I was like, okay, what are they going to do? Are they going to put them at their more natural positions? Or would you maybe keep Peyton Holt at third base because it is kind of a newer position for him? Give him as many early season reps as possible, get him really comfortable with that position because Peyton Stovall is supposed to come back at some point. And so at that point, he would have to move back to third anyways. And so it's like, okay, what do you do there? Does it hurt you defensively? Plus, Sprague Lott is a roommate of Vahiva Aloy, the shortstop. And so they kind of have this, I would say, chemistry. Dave Van Horn kind of hinted at that whenever Stovall came back because he made Stovall and Vahiva play catch before, scrimmages, whereas, he was trying to play catch with Sprague Lott. So you imagine that there's some chemistry there up the middle. But then again, Peyton Holt is a tremendous defensive second baseman. We saw that last year. We've seen it a little bit, flashes and scrimmages. So it doesn't surprise me too much that he would put Peyton Holt back at second and Sprague Lott at third because that's probably the best defensive lineup as it stands right now. But it may impact maybe later on in the season because Peyton Holt could have to switch back to third base in SEC play, and then at that point, if you make an error at third base, it becomes a lot more magnified against an Auburn or LSU than it would against a James Madison or whoever else they play in non-conference play.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think that goes back to what I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about Stovall and just over his overall injury outlook. Like 4 to 6 weeks is not meaningless, right? It's not season ending, and you feel like okay, he'll come back for SEC play, but that's a considerable chunk of time. And I think if it were 2 weeks, yeah, maybe you kind of try and keep Holt at third. If it could be 6 weeks and you're playing half the season, you want your best defensive lineup possible out there. If they're both going to be hitting, might as well put them at their best positions and let them play there until Stovall returns, and then you adjust. I mean, who knows? Sprague Lott had a very, very productive season at Richmond. Maybe he lights the world on fire, and then you've got real decisions to make. Not saying Stovall will be left out of the lineup, but maybe one of those guys then has to become the DH. I think you play them at their preferred spot, and then when Stovall returns, you figure it out from there. So, speaking of figuring it out, I think the position battles are pretty much all determined, Hutch. I think Jason Jones is going to win the battle in left and be the starter on opening day. And I think Hudson White is probably going to be the catcher with Ryder Helfrich, the freshman, as the backup catcher. Does that sound right to you? Any qualms with those two predictions?
I think that's what's going to happen. I'm still not sold on Jason Jones in left. I think they want him to be the guy. He strikes out a little too much for my liking, doesn't hit the ball consistently enough. When he does hit it, though, it goes a long way. He hits it very, very hard. So he definitely is the better power option at that spot. And then I still am a big Will Edmondson fan. I think he's a guy that's going to demand some playing time because all he's done is hit everywhere he's been at JUCO over the summer, back during the fall, during the preseason. All he does is hit. So I think he's going to get a chance. Plus, he's also a more natural outfielder than Jason Jones. Although Jason Jones is plenty athletic enough, I'm not really too worried about him defensively. Although he had a pretty nasty crash into the wall the other day trying to catch a double off the wall that maybe someone else makes a better play at. Maybe didn't have quite the same awareness that a guy that's played it his whole life might. So that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think that's probably going to be how it plays out in left. And I think you're exactly right at catcher. I think we're going to see a healthy dose of Ryder Helfrich this year. But on opening day, I think Hudson White's going to be there behind the plate.
Yeah. And look, Hudson White has been terrific production-wise in the fall and in the spring. So I think a lot of fans are kind of excited about the potential of Helfrich, and when DVH is comparing him to James McCann, there's reason to get excited. But it's hard to kind of unseat a guy that's got experience playing for Texas Tech, an older guy. He made a terrific throw for a caught stealing on Friday in the scrimmage. Sounds from everything we've heard, he's made strides defensively. Feels like the right decision to let the older guy be the guy opening day, and then let the competition kind of rage on into the spring. I imagine we see Helfrich pretty soon in some capacity, giving him some at bats just because the potential is too good. Speaking of the guys that are going to start throwing to the catchers here in a little bit, uh, the starting rotation, Hutch. I think we know who Friday is. We know who the other two guys are on the weekend. What we don't know is what order. I think we might have a feeling, but we don't know for sure what order those other two guys are going to fall into, and we don't know who the Monday starter is going to be, at least this weekend, and really who the midweek starters are going to be moving forward. No midweek games this week. Next week, in between James Madison and the trip to Dallas. So let's just focus on this opening weekend, Hutch. What do you think is the order of operations for Arkansas starting pitching staff Friday through Monday? How do you think they line up?
Well, Hagen Smith is going to go on Friday. That's for sure. And then I'm pretty sure it's going to be Mason Molina on Saturday, followed by Brady Tigert on Sunday. I'm just basing that off of how they pitched in the preseason scrimmages. They've had Hagen and Mason Molina match up against each other each of the last Fridays, so you probably want him to pitch kind of closer to Friday, whereas Tigert, I think they had one weekend where they went Saturday or Sunday, Monday, and Tigert started on Sunday. I think he threw on Saturday this past weekend, so you're going to push him back just one day. So, I mean, you could keep him on Saturday and push Mason Molina back 2 days. Maybe they do that, but I still think based on what we've seen, it's going to be Hagen, Molina, Tigert. And then as far as Monday, I actually just got a text with some updates on how the scrimmage went on Sunday, which was indoors because of the weather. So it was closed to the public, closed to the media. And Bybee did pitch. Ben Bybee did pitch. That was something I was keeping an eye on. I think he's going to be that fourth starter. I don't know how he did in the scrimmage. I just know that he pitched and he started. And I think he's kind of an older guy. He pitched a little bit last year as a true freshman. I think he's going to be the starter in that fourth game and is going to at least get the first look at being that midweek guy. If it doesn't go well, then obviously they've got other options. Gabe Gackle is one that is pretty electric. It would not surprise me if he got the start. He's been tremendous this preseason. Maybe not, quite ready to extend it out quite, true starter innings, but you got to start somewhere. So he would be the other maybe guy that I would keep an eye on as far as an option to start that fourth game, other than Ben Bybee.
Interesting. I think I would throw Colin Fisher into the mix as well, just based off him getting some opportunities to start these scrimmages, and DVH had some pretty high praise for him last Monday at the Swatters Club. Of course, he like 3 hours later got hit pretty good in a couple innings, but he's had a couple. He's had at least one really good outing in the spring preseason. I don't know. Again, I'm assuming he probably pitched yesterday in the closed door setting as well. We don't have the stats from that. I think you're right. I think it's down to Bybee and Fisher. Bybee, Gackle, and Fisher. I'm going to throw him in. But what I will say about Gackle is, I'm curious. I have a hunch that maybe his arm is too valuable to be a weekday starter. That maybe you would want to save him and make him a Friday night, Saturday night relief guy. So I wonder if, but perhaps with no midweek game this week, we could see a starting pitcher pitch on Monday that's not going to be a weekday starter moving forward, right? There's a chance that DVH is just, these are the four best starters I've got, and when I get to a regional or to Omaha, like these are going to be the guys that I run with to start 4 straight games, and that's where I'm going, and we'll adjust as we need to when the midweek games arrive later on. Or do you think he would probably, the Monday starter is going to be a weekday starter? Do you think that's something that he could also do to just keep the consistency?
I think he's going to just try it out. I mean, if Bybee goes out there and starts and does well, for example, then he'll probably let him start, the following, midweek or whatever. And it might be a situation where he pitches, but they, have him available to throw an inning on the weekends as well, because, those guys are going to throw a bullpen anyways. Maybe let them throw their bullpen in a real game. And the other thing too is he might, as far as, Gackle being a valuable arm, I agree, a guy that's going to need to pitch on the weekends. If no one actually emerges as a true starter guy that's going to give you 5-6 innings, I could totally see DVH being just kind of a Johnny Holstaff guy because they
Mm.
do have enough quantity of arms that you could probably do that. Even whenever you don't have two midweek games, you could do that. Piece it together, just have, yeah, you throw 2 innings here, you throw 3 innings there, and just kind of piece it together. Then at that point, everyone's available for the weekend. Maybe you don't burn a guy, have him throw 7 innings and 100 pitches where you're not going to pitch him again until the next week, midweek game. So I could also see that being the case just because of the depth on this pitching staff.
Ugh, Johnny Holstaff, Hutch. He usually means that us journalists are there for like 4.5 hours on a Wednesday night because there's a lot of pitching changes and no rhythm and walks and the thing about Johnny Holstaff is if all the guys perform well, you're in good shape. But if one guy has a big bad inning, it kind of screws up the then you start using a lot of arms when maybe you only wanted to use 3, 4, 5. So we'll see. I think that's definitely an option. The option that I personally, for my happiness, like the least. But I know that's probably a smart lever that DVH will pull at some point this season for sure. Uh, Hutch, any bold predictions from you for the baseball season? I went on the record and said national championship. I did it. I have been beaten and broken by the basketball and football seasons after both of them having at least some optimism to start the year. I've realized it's time for me to turn on my optimism to start believing again. I wrote that I thought Arkansas would win the national championship this year. Do you have you don't have to match my boldness there, but do you have anything prediction wise that we can make fun of you about in 4 months time?
Well, I don't disagree with that prediction. I'll say that. It's been a long time since I felt this good going into a baseball season. Probably the last time I felt this confident was 2018, and they damn near won it that year. So I feel really good about that. But just for the sake of being different, I will say Hagen Smith is going to be in the mix for the Golden Spikes Award as a pitcher, which is a little bit hard to do. We saw it last year with Paul Skeens was right there. I can't remember if he won it or if Dylan Cruz won it because they split the national awards. One of those two dudes won all of them. So I think he's going to be right in the mix right there. I think he's going to be an absolute monster this year. I think he's going to be a top 10 draft pick for sure. And we're in store for a very special season. Maybe building off of that, I would say this pitching staff, it may not lead the country in ERA, just because there's probably going to be some team that plays in the Patriot League or something like that just dominates. But I could see this team finishing top 10 nationally in ERA. 2013, they led the country in ERA. I don't think we're going to see a number quite like that because I think they had like a 1.89 ERA that year as a team, which is just ridiculous. That was back with the dead bats, dead balls, everything. Not quite the dead ball era anymore in college baseball, so it's probably going to be larger than that, but I think it's going to be much improved than the typical 4-point-something ERA that we see. That's still pretty good when you factor in all the guys that pitch on midweeks and all that kind of stuff. But I think they're going to be a historically dominant type pitching staff this year. I really believe that.
It all comes down to that buffer group that you wrote about this weekend, I think, or maybe last week. But I like the top end and the back end of the rotation look really good. They've got to find some consistent guys that can eat up some. There's going to be times, especially early this season, when Hagen Smith's only he's thrown 5 scoreless innings, but he's gotten 100 pitches on his ledger, and DVH pulls them. Can they get that 6th, 7th inning taken care of? Before they turn it over to whoever the closer is, whether it's Wood or any of their handful of stud pitchers, and they've got a lot of guys to choose from in that group. So I think that's kind of where the confidence lies. But we got to see it, right? I'm going to be in see it to believe it mode, and I guess I do believe it predicting a national championship, but I'm just not sure who of that group is going to be the guy that steps up. And I think that's really the biggest question left for this pitching staff. Do you see any I guess closer. Do you have a hard opinion? You think it's just going to be closer by committee, or do you think DVH maybe strays from that as the season gets rolling?
He'll eventually find a guy. I feel like he usually does that they depend on to close games. Like, Gage Wood last year was not the closer until about halfway through the season when they're like, okay, this guy's our closer. I think they're going to do a little bit by committee, but that's talk about who we don't know who's going to be the guys. That's the beauty of this pitching staff is they've got so many options that even if a couple of them end up underperforming or laying an egg or God forbid getting hurt, something like that, they've got guys to step up. As long as you keep that rotation good. I will say I'm slightly concerned about Mason Molina. He has walked a ton of dudes this preseason. He got lit up his last two outings. I'm a little bit concerned, but he did perform at a very high level in the Big 12 at Texas Tech for a 40-win team last year. So that gives me puts me at ease a little bit. But between you've got we talked about the starting rotation. That's three. You mentioned the buffer group I wrote about. That's all those sophomore guys: the Gage Wood, Parker Coyle, Ben Bybee, Cooper Dossett, Christian Fouch. That's 8 guys. You got Will McIntyre. You got Cody Frank coming back from injury. You've got
Faraday,
Dylan
don't
Carter's
forget my
good.
boy Faraday.
Jake Faraday. I mean, suddenly you're looking at and then you got throw in some freshmen. Suddenly you got like 14 or 15 guys that could be good for you. You don't need 14 to 15 guys, especially in the
Right.
postseason. You really need 8 or 9, and that will get you through a weekend, get you through a regional. So that's what gives me the most confidence is that they've got options. There's not like you're looking at last year going in, you're like, okay, Will McIntyre and Zach Morris, these guys have to be good for you. Especially if you get a bunch of injuries like they did, those guys have to be good because those are the guys that are dependable. These freshmen might be good, they might be bad. We don't know. They've got talent. You don't have to count on those guys this year. So that's kind of why they call it the buffer group, those sophomore group that Matt Hobbs talked about. So that's what gives me the most confidence about this staff is that there's just so many options that they have to choose from.
And it's in ways it's how great programs build across any sport. Alabama football, Georgia football, they stack pieces, and you stack enough, eventually you're going to find a few that are the big hits, and that can really define your football season. Arkansas has got no shortage of options. They really, like you said, they need to find probably 3 or 4 consistent pitchers out of the bullpen, and they've got about 8 options. If they can find half of those options that are quality pitchers, they're going to be in great shape. Before I move on, real quick, one thing on football: my what the hog this week is more of a question than a gripe with social media. It's a question for you, Hutch. I want you to enlighten me. Walk me through what is going on with this. With the drama is not the right word, but some of the unsatisfaction with Arkansas baseball uniforms. What's going like pinstripes? We're not fans of the pinstripes. We love the red. We want that to be what's just walk me through what's going on. I saw some unhappy tweets about baseball uniforms this week.
Yeah, funny you mentioned that. We actually have a column coming out on Best of Arkansas Sports about the baseball uniforms. We've got one of our guys, one of our writers, had a very strong opinion. One of these people you're talking about these uniforms, and I think it's
Okay.
just because the uniforms that they have are great. Like, why change something that's already great? Why mess it up? And who knows? I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe it looks great. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what they're wearing as long as they win. People won't care. But I think the thing is just that people don't like change. I mean, you should have been here whenever they debuted the forward-facing hog logo. Boy, that was a fun time to be on Twitter. I'll say that.
Wait, so are we anti pinstripes? Like in a change sense? Is that what we're anti right now?
I guess, me
Okay.
personally, I'm not even a big uniform guy. Like, I mean, I love the Sunday creams that they wear. I mean, those are awesome uniforms. I think they're the best uniforms out there in baseball. But I'm also not like going to just protest, pinstripes or whatever.
Okay. I'm Googling Arkansas Sunday creams right now, and something about disparate alcohol laws came up, so I'll have to research that another time. Okay, I like I like ranking uniforms, and I'm not gonna have super hot takes about it. But the stuff that I saw over the weekend, I kind of liked the pinstripes, but I might be biased. UNC Wilmington, my alma mater, has some pinstripes that I absolutely adore. So, but I'm not a Yankees fan, so I don't want that accusation coming from anybody. So, uh, let's move on real quick on the football front. Signing day came and went last Wednesday. No additions to the 2024 class, but the Hogs did add to their 2025 class Wednesday night. Of course, it's non-binding, but they secured the commitment of Carius Kern, the number 1 ranked prospect in the state of Arkansas and the number 18 offensive tackle in the country out of Marion High School. Hutch, how big is this, man? I mean, this is just some positive momentum. It shows Pittman can still recruit. They've taken a lot of hits on the trail. This is a big win for Arkansas football as a whole.
If nothing else, it's good PR because they've struggled recruiting in state. We saw Missouri come in and kind of whip your tail a little bit, recruiting players from the natural state. So this is a big one. This is a big one. This is a guy that can play either side of the ball. He could be a defensive tackle. He could be an offensive lineman. These kind of prospects, Arkansas doesn't produce. It's not Texas or Florida or California or Louisiana or Alabama even. Arkansas does not produce these caliber of athletes very often. So when they do, you really want to go get them. Now, I will say, Courtney Crutchfield at one point was committed to Arkansas, and then he ended up with Missouri. So you still gotta hang on to him. There's still a lot of time between now and National Signing Day. But boy, they really need to kind of reel him in and secure the other guys around the state too, to kind of get back on that, because that's always been a very important part of recruiting as an Arkansas coach.
For sure. I thought this was a personal attack on my signing day column where I wrote about Arkansas's 2024 recruiting class. Kind of it emulated in a lot of ways the struggles of the 2023 season, where yes, there was, some good prospects and good wins, but for the most part, I think both the recruiting class and the season were defined by the losses. Crutchfield, Bethel Roman, not getting either of the top quarterbacks out of the state of Arkansas. And then that was another thing too, was their biggest losses came at home. On the football field, the Donald W. Reynolds Razorback crowd got to see 2 wins over Kent State and FIU this year. And the home recruiting just wasn't up to the standard that it should be when you've got guys like Crutchfield coming out of Arkansas. Really tough to see them leave the state, especially to the neighbors to the north, who we don't need to name anymore. The stolen the prodigal son, Eli Drinkwitz, out of Arkansas. So, yeah, I think. Do you think, have you heard anything about what they plan for Carius, like offensive or defensive side? I mean, it's reading the tea leaves, I'm getting the sense offensive tackle first, but a guy with that kind of versatility, take him and figure it out at the end, right?
I think at this point it's truly up in the air. I think they could. I think both Deke Adams and Eric Mateos have been recruiting him. He's probably got. He said he's got a better relationship with Deke Adams just because Eric Mateos just got here.
Right.
But still, I think it's truly up in the air. It reminds me of Patrick Kudus when he committed, because when he committed out of some school in Memphis, he originally committed as a defensive tackle, and then a little bit later, not that much longer after that, it was like, oh, they're recruiting as an offensive lineman, and he came here, signed as an offensive lineman. Now he's been starting. So it's a very similar situation to that. It could also just depend on the need of the team. I mean, Arkansas needed offensive linemen at that time, and we'll see if they still need that, or if they've solidified it enough to where, hey, maybe you need that guy with that kind of athleticism and stuff, in the middle of your defensive line.
Yeah, and either way, I mean, they need interior defensive linemen too, as far as high school recruiting goes. I mean, they've shown an ability to go through the portal. Excuse me. I think that they've got pretty good defensive tackles this year, starting with Cam Ball. But building for the future, there's a lot of positions out there, man. Offensive line, wide receiver, defensive tackle that they're a little short on right now in terms of building for the future. But we can discuss that later. We touched on it a little bit last week, I think. And the first thing that has to happen for this football program is they need to win this year. They don't need to win big, but if Pittman's are going to be around for the long term, the focus is on this coming season more than anything else, and get some wins there, start building some momentum again, and we'll see what happens recruiting down the road. But all right, man, that's 45 minutes right on the dot right now. It's a good place for us to stop, I think. Good discussion today. Really can't wait for baseball season. One quick note before I have Hutch tell everyone where you guys can find his work. We will record our next episode on Tuesday, or it'll at least come out after the 4-game weekend series between Arkansas and James Madison at Baum-Walker Stadium. We're going to wait and make sure all those games are played before we hit the record button, because it feels kind of foolish to record and then, who knows what happens on Monday between those two teams. So, Hutch, turn it over to you. Plug yourself, any stories, where can people find you, and what can they read on Best of Arkansas Sports right now?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter or X at NWA Hutch. I tweet all my stuff there, but you can also go visit our site directly, bestofarkansassports.com. I'm really starting to ramp up the baseball coverage. I'm very excited about that. We talked earlier about the buffer group that I wrote about. I've written about extensively each of the 3 starters. I've got some other stories planned this week, a deep dive on the look at the catchers with some insight from Bobby Wernis, who focuses on coaching those guys. So really excited to kind of get going with that baseball coverage.
Awesome. And you can find my work at swtimes.com. That's the Southwest Times Record as part of USA Today. Follow me on X/Twitter at JacksonFuller16. I'll be having, I think I'm going to have a Hagen Smith feature come out this week. Look at just kind of how he's dealing with all the preseason hype around him. And spoiler warning, he's dealing with it pretty well, because he doesn't really pay attention to it much. But I got some interesting tidbits from people around him, and really looking forward to watching him kind of blossom this season. What we saw on Friday at the scrimmage was electric. So going to be a fun spring at Baum-Walker Stadium. So Hutch, thank you so much for joining me as always, and I will see you Wednesday for home game against Tennessee.